So what we want to touch on today for the anniversary is look at uh, cyber terrorism, which is now the big thing. I had back two regulars, Dan Lorman and Richard Steenan, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. How, what are the bad guys doing? How to keep the bad guys out of your network? And I don't care who starts. Who wants to start?
I'll just mention briefly, Mike, that I remember where I was back in my government days as before I became CISO in Michigan, but not by much. I was working e-government and building the first Michigan.Gov here in Michigan in Governor John Engler's administration, and we were in the Romney building at an e-Michigan meeting, and somebody said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center, and everybody ran out the ground floor of the Romney building there in downtown Lansing, and we're all watching just like you as the second plane hit the second tower and just shocked by it. And then they quickly closed state government. We all went home, and everyone walked out of the building looking up, thinking planes might be hitting us in Lansing. We didn't know. It was a scary moment, and I'm not making. It led to so many changes, and it led to so many different, obviously Department of Homeland Security came years after that, working with critical infrastructure. Really, my involvement to become the first state CISO, state chief information security officer, was a direct result of what happened at 9/11, because the desire was, we needed more physical security around government, but we also needed more cybersecurity, and that really all happened as a result of that. So thinking back to that day, so many things happened working critical infrastructure and over the last 20 plus years, but that day really was a defining moment.
Yeah, I was living in Grand Rapids right by the airport. What struck me was, I was on the glide path to the airport, so planes were constantly going over. And for 3 days, they shut down the airspace because they didn't know who was doing what to where and what was the next target, right? It was very eerie, So
it was. One other quick thing on that I just mentioned is we had 4 visitors from England. I just moved from England 3 years before that, and we lived in England for 7 years. And our visitors from England were stuck in the United States for another 10 days, and they thought it might be a whole month, but they got out a little earlier than that. But it just dramatic impacts all around the world.
I had just started. I was just going to tell my little story here. I had just started at WWJ News Radio 950 doing an email newsletter covering Michigan technology for them, the late lamented Great Lakes IT Report. I had started exactly a week earlier on Tuesday, September 4th, the day after Labor Day. So I'd been at work there all of a week, and I had just gotten to work, and somebody said a plane flew into the World Trade Center. And so everybody in the building walked into the newsroom at WWJ, where we had, 3 televisions going. And I came to know that whenever all 3 televisions are showing the same thing, that's usually a bad day. So we were all in there watching when the second plane hit, and the woman next to me, I remember, said under her breath, "Definitely terrorism." After the first plane, the one might have been an accident. 2, you knew something really bad was up. And we turned the power of the station up to 50,000 watts omnidirectional because we didn't know what was happening. Right behind WWJ in Southfield, I don't know if you know this, but there's an Army Reserve Center there. And all of a sudden there were Bradley fighting vehicles blocking the entrance and guys walking around with M16s, right behind WWJ. And that was really something. And nearby in that area, the American Center building, the old American Motors headquarters skyscraper is there, and they evacuated basically every tall office building in Detroit because they didn't know what else might be up.
Yeah, Richard?
Well, I was at Interop in Atlanta at the big conference center there, and there was some sort of communications set up at the end of the hall, and they were broadcasting on huge TVs. So, of course, after the first tower got hit, we all went down there and witnessed the second tower and big screen TVs. And it was devastating. We were like the rest of you, it was like, what's going on? You never know. And there's several large targets in Atlanta, including CNN, which was evacuating. And, I was stuck there for the rest of the week. And I know, I think I got back. I was one of the first airplanes back in the air the Thursday after the hits, and got home safely.
I still remember that picture. I think it was somewhere in Labrador where all the transcon flights going to Europe or back from Europe all were
Yep.
forced to land. And it
Gander.
was like, I don't know, 100
Yeah.
airplanes on this little tiny runway, right? And then the people, I think it was Labrador, but it took
Yeah.
in all the passengers and, treated them like guests. And that was the other nice, that was the only nice thing to come out about it was everybody
Yeah.
was suddenly very patriotic and very supportive and kumbaya kind of thing. And that was a wonderful part there. So,
Yep.
But anyway, we digress.
There's a musical about that whole thing.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Won a ton of awards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we still got the bad guys around, but they're not doing as much physical stuff these days, but certainly doing a heck of a lot more cyber bad stuff. And let's talk about that. What's the top thing that you're most concerned about right now, guys?
Richard?
Well, certainly the continuous evolution and development of very sophisticated attacks against our mobile devices, as witnessed by the two no-click executables on iPhones in the last week. Supposedly, NSO Group, who are experts at developing these vulnerabilities, have or people are using this new vulnerability to deploy the NSO Group's spyware. So it's not a drop everything and everybody patch kind of thing, but it's because it's only relevant to people who might be targeted by NSO Group customers, which includes two of us on this panel, because journalists are definitely ones that are often targeted. Now, targeted by law enforcement. It's not like the NSO Group is the bad guys here. It's law enforcement. And depends on what country you're in. Law enforcement can be really bad guys. So watch out.
Okay, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on right now, and it continues to be. I think kind of looking back at the first half of this year, and we always do the predictions at the end of the year and early next year, but the trends across the board, are continuing to, I don't want to use the word scary, but the ransomware was picked up in the first half for sure. There was a lot of, the numbers have come in and talked about a lull that, maybe things were not as bad in 2022, but 2023, for the numbers, again, the people that I'm looking at and talking to, almost record numbers for the first half of this year. So ransomware continues to be a challenge. The numbers, across the board, it's the hits. And I don't want to sound like one of the things we don't want to do is just be focused on FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and all the bad headlines. But we had Michigan and Michigan State right here in our own state have been hit in the last few months. Significant outages, and I don't think we had a session where we talked about right at the beginning of school, them being down, but universities across the country being hit, hospitals continuing to be hit, and there's a laundry list of. I did a blog a few weeks ago. We can certainly post it for people and get it to you, but just the headlines just within we're 1 to 2, 3 a week that are just a day. I'm sorry, that are just new headlines coming at us. And in the midst of all that, and just throw this out, we can wider discussion. There's a lot going on in the cyber industry. I'd love to hear Richard's views on a couple different companies and different things about what trends he sees in the industry. So you've got these sophisticated attacks going on. You've got the numbers continuing to quietly grow just below the radar, meaning it's not front page of USA Today and Washington Post and New York Times, but they're still out there. They're still hitting. And at the same time, we're heading into a cybersecurity awareness month, which maybe is a whole other show by itself. But where the message is that they've done a lot of surveys from CISA and other government agencies that people think cybersecurity is important, but it's just too confusing. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. They have a bunch of tips. We can talk about that, or we can save that for another show. We can walk through what those tips might be. But people just feeling like it's hopeless. I mean, what can I really do to protect myself? And so you've got a lot of diverging trends, I think, at the moment, which is a kind of a unique time. Kind of people, and it's really almost true of our economy right now. Are we heading into a recession? Are we heading into boom times? Nobody kind of knows. We're at a crossroads, and nobody really feels like. So there's a lot of different crosswinds, if you want to look at it that way. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing at the moment. I don't know, Richard, what your thoughts were.
Yeah, not certainly, everything you say is out there. But don't forget that a constant ransomware and successful, taking down of universities, University of Michigan in particular, all that stuff is the driver for the cybersecurity industry, right? So without the attackers, we wouldn't have an industry, because nobody would, you wouldn't need to patch your stuff if nobody was going to attack you. And there are some risks I've talked about on this program of the attackers, slowing down, right? If Russia actually had a regime change, then we wouldn't have very much ransomware. It's still possible, still important to prevent ransomware, but you won't see it in the news. So the pressure on the investors and the people who work in cybersecurity to grow their businesses would go away, but that's very unlikely. So it's interesting that, on top of the trends that Dan's mentioning and picking up on a lot of people, CISOs especially, saying, there's too many security vendors. It's time to rationalize this, and there should be consolidation, et cetera. And I'm not sure what the driver there is. Certainly, the Ciscos, Microsofts, Palo Altos of the world, CrowdStrikes are the ones who benefit from a consolidation, right? I mean, it doesn't mean take all the best.
Kaspersky as well.
Kaspersky as well, right? They need consolidation so they can sell more stuff to the same customers. That's always in our industry, at least, that's always a formula for poorer products. And in our business, if they're poorer products, they don't do as good a job as security. So I'm definitely not a proponent of any sort of consolidation. You should pick the best of breed for whatever you need, and you should figure that out. And certainly the numbers don't support this consolidation theory, right? There's very little consolidation. The only segment that's ever consolidated is antivirus, and that's because it's going away. It was Microsoft on the one hand making antivirus free, so it's no longer a commercially positive thing to be in that business. And the CrowdStrikes and SentinelOnes and Cybereasons have a better thing than traditional antivirus. So all those pressures combined, and now you pretty much are down to Avast and AVG and Norton LifeLock, which all got combined into one company, and then they renamed themselves Gem Security, I think is what they're called.
Matthew,
nobody knows about them.
Matt, you got some questions?
Yeah, I was just curious. One of the things I've been reading about is the so-called software supply chain, where companies might not be aware of all of the components, including some open source stuff off the shelf that might be in their applications. Do you see that as a problem still, or have companies been pretty good about trying to root that kind of thing out?
No, it's a huge problem. Companies are as good at rooting that out as they are at finding all the vulnerabilities in their systems, right? It's an infinite task, and they just don't seem to be able to get there. So it's going to be a problem for a while. It's not, solving the problem, it's basically quick. There's a new disastrous vulnerability in this open source Java library. Quick, tell me how that impacts me. We can get to answer that question, right? And it does mean having a software bill of materials for everything you've got. And now you can, just look it up and go, oh, okay, that means our ERP system is totally vulnerable. We should do something about it. Or our network time clocks are vulnerable. We should do something about them. It's going to be all over the place. So yeah, that's a problem. But the real issue in supply chain is that people can still legitimately say, look, I'm not a target for the Russian SRV or GRU. Sure, you're not. But if you have a customer who is a target, then they will use you. And it's not going to be good for your organization if you're the stepping stone into the target.
Yeah, I would just a couple quick responses to what some of the things that Richard says. And I we often agree. And I think I agree with about 80% of what Richard said. I think there's part of it that I think what I'm hearing from CISOs that I meet with around the country, there's a desire. I agree with you, Richard. There's not really much consolidation, and your point is well taken. And every year you see that, there's going to be a big consolidation in the cyber industry, and it never seems to happen. And these companies sell, and then they go off and they start new companies again. The same people you see round and round and round, starting their fifth and sixth company. So I think that is true. I do see CISOs wanting, if they have 100 tools, they want 50. If they have 70, they want 35. The desire of CISOs is a complexity out there is just so hard because, it's like, I had somebody who used, I won't even name vendor names, but I had XYZ vendor. We were great at it. And those 3 people left. We got 2 new people. They didn't like that tool. They like this other tool because they're certified in it, and they're still running that tool over there. And so I'm hearing that a lot, the desire for consolidated platforms, but that's really a challenge. I will mention one other trend that I'm seeing out there a lot. And again, I'd love to hear Richard's view on this, but it's related to everything we've just been talking about. And that is, Gen AI, generative AI seems to be sucking the air out of the room wherever you go, however you start the conversation, whether you're talking about identity management, whether you're talking about, you name the topic, vulnerability management or SOC, security operations centers, whatever it may be, it always seems to head towards Gen AI. And what are you doing about Gen AI? What is your platform? What is the plan? And so there's a lot of really good, and I always try and balance this. I've told this story many times on this show over the years about how I almost got fired for opposing Wi-Fi. So I don't want to go through that story again. That's 20-year-old story. But security pros are known, I've said this before, but we're known for saying no. The answer is no. What was the question, right? The answer is no. And so that's what we're known for. And so we got to get to yes. We got to get to solutions for these things. But in the environment that we're in right now, it's really challenging. And so Gen AI, I think it's going to be it's what the attackers are using against us. It's what the defenders are now seeing more and more in the products. And it's also bringing in what I call, I call it shadow IT on steroids. So more and more people just using ChatGPT, the free versions. Free is hard to compete with. You got free versions of Bard, free versions of ChatGPT. And so those are challenges for security pros, because how do I secure that? How do I secure unlicensed free tools that are all over the place that everybody wants to use? And we're back to the old days of shadow IT again. So those are some more trends that I see.
Yeah, and that's obviously going to be a trend because it's the biggest thing to happen in IT and arguably in the world of information science in our lives. I see there's going to be good and bad as always, and I don't actually see evidence of the bad, though it's so obvious that it's going to happen that it will happen. Because the bad is going to be, deep fakes, people creating news stories, whatever, or just creating better phishing emails. So yeah, for sure that's there. But the good, it comes in several flavors. One is, just generative AI for natural language processing is giving us this kind of machine interface that's really great. You give it a bunch of stuff and ask it to explain it in English, and it does a great job. And I've incorporated that in some of the tools we're building. It's really just mind-boggling. But the cool stuff are the people that are working on, hey, here's a whole bunch of logs and alerts and stuff to essentially do our threat hunting for us. What do you see in this data? And a lot of companies are already introducing tools to do that. So that's going to be fantastic. Yep. And then the next side of that is what you were mentioning, Dan, is how do you secure your employees' use of ChatGPT? And there are a bunch of startups that have figured out ways to do that. So they could, the typical way that you expose your information to a engine like that is you vectorize the data, you lay it into the same vector model that they have, and then it can work with it. So you can obfuscate the data that you vectorize. It's quite cool. And that'll be one way to not expose data. But of course, OpenAI has said, hey, look at, you're going to have an enterprise license, and we're not ever going to use the data that you pass off to us to train our models. So there's a contractual thing. I'm not a big believer in relying on contracts when you're dealing with a vendor, right?
Yeah.
It's the data's there, and maybe they accidentally leak it to themselves, and
Yeah.
now everybody's got it. So yeah. But anyway, it's a brand new world, and it's going to be fascinating. It'll keep some of us in business.
Matthew?
I was also the other thing I wanted to know about was sort of the weaponization of legitimate testing tools. Essentially attacks that look like legitimate pen testing. I've read about that recently. Is there a lot of that going on, or some of that going on, or is that overblown as a fear?
No, it's not overblown. I haven't seen it going on. There are a few things like Shodan, which is just it's like a Google search engine for everything that's connected to the internet. So when an attacker discovers a new vulnerability, they can use Shodan to find all the devices that are connected to the internet that might have that vulnerability, and then they can go and attack those websites or those devices. So I guess in that sense, it's been weaponized. And there are other people that have kind of hobby web crawlers, internet crawlers that just ping the entire internet, every hour and figure out what's there and can find those vulnerabilities. And it's one of the reasons that a new 0-day is so dangerous, is because the hackers of all breeds, script kiddies all the way up to the Russian GRU, can quickly find a target that's susceptible to that new vulnerability.
Yeah, Matt, I would just add, it's funny that there's so many stories. I'm sure Richard's got many of them as well, but of, organizations that have done pen tests that have gone wrong and, bring down operations, even when it's quote unquote, known by the CISO or the security team or somebody, but, other people didn't know. And sometimes that's by design, like we're going to do this, but we're not going to break anything, but we're going to see how far we can get by not telling anybody. And other times, things go south. And I've seen people bring down networks. I've seen government networks go down over the years. I've seen even recently stories in the last year of, pen tests gone wrong. So, certainly it's a challenge because you want to be able to really, test your environment. Many people have ethical hacking programs, and they want people to be able to report them, and their whole hack the Pentagon, there's a lot of different companies, HackerOne, I can start naming lots and lots of companies that do this for a living, and different systems they use. And for the most part, they're very, very helpful because you want to know about these vulnerabilities before the bad guys do, right? So in that sense, it's good. But I've also seen where things do not go well. And I've known CISOs that literally got fired for doing, anonymous, pen testing that only certain individuals knew about and others didn't. And they brought down the operational network, and that person no longer works there any longer. So pen tests have unique history in our industry.
There's a famous story.
Oh, go ahead.
Famous story of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Back when they were just Price Waterhouse, did an attack on, a testing of Nabisco's operational security, and they shut down the ovens that the cookies were baked in, and the doors shut with people in the ovens.
Oh,
no.
I didn't hear that part.
Yep.
Wow, huh? Yeah.
Nobody died.
Let's pivot slightly. Next month is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, as Dan alluded to. And also next month is an event that I think Dan participated setting up under former Governor Snyder. October 18th, I believe there's a date for the Cybersecurity Summit, at this time at the Novi Showplace. It used to be downtown. Why don't we talk real briefly about that? Because I told Leslie from Matt's old employer that I would plug it a little bit for her. So that's coming up. And how is that going to play into that? Is that a really good event for people to attend to really find out what's going on?
Absolutely. And thank you for mentioning it. And it really is. and I want to make sure people know how to get to it. It's Michigan.Gov/cybersecurity. They can get all the information on it. Wide list of people coming from all over the country, speakers from Washington, speakers from other states, CIOs, and we've been very successful in Michigan at continuing to attract not just great Michigan stories, but also stories from other states and the other governments, private sector, public sector. Transportation, of course, is a big theme in Michigan. So yeah, and it's really, there's the 18th is at the Suburban Showplace in Novi. The 19th there's a second day with the K through 12s. The schools are going to have different types of we talk about hackathons, but really different ways that they can prove themselves out and compete against each other to show their skills. But yeah, it's an event. I encourage people to go to Michigan.Gov/cybersecurity. A lot of things that are going to be announced there that we can't talk about yet, but there's some really cool activity happening, and it's really a great event. So I would just say that, and I just say for the month of maybe we come back and talk about this separately at another time, but for the month of October being Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is really a global month now. It's not just US anymore. The theme around make security easier is really the focus this time around, because people think it's too hard. And 4 main areas that CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, is encouraging people to think about are using strong passwords and a password manager. That's number 1. Number 2, turning on multi-factor authentication, MFA. 3, recognizing and reporting phishing incidents. And 4, updating their software. So they're trying to make it pretty simple. Those 4 areas to help your home, your work, your business. And so those are some of the themes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Richard, final thoughts?
Well, I too agree that you should go to the Michigan Cybersecurity Conference. Great networking event. It's unusual for us to have local security events here in Michigan, and you meet everybody who's anybody interested in cybersecurity. On the CISA advice, I would also add to that, you should back up all of your data all the time.
I love it. Great. I agree too. I'm just giving you their 4 though.
Yeah.
You're right.
All right. And so let's you can do your shameless plugs now. Let's start with Dan. If people want to reach out to Presidio or to you directly, how do they do that?
Sure. Go to Presidio.gov. Presidio.com is our website. You see my name there. It's Presidio.com. And Dan Lorman on LinkedIn, easy to talk to me, connect with me. I also blog for Government Technology Magazine. So Lorman on Cybersecurity is my weekly blog.
And Mr. Richard, I think behind you is a whole bunch of your new yearbooks. Looks like it to me. Yes.
I'm plugging the security yearbook.
Pull that out and just go ahead and plug the heck out.
I don't want it to fall on my head.
Yeah.
Security Yearbook 2023. This is a history of the IT security industry and a directory of all the vendors in it, over 3,000 of them. Just go to it-harvest.com, shop, and buy the book. There's only a few left, right? Like 600 from the printing left.